I have a brand new LiveTime installation here with nothing set up, and this is the version 3.9.3, which is a good bit newer than the last video series I did, where I did 0 to racing in 5 minutes or whatever. This one I'm going to be a little bit more detailed and try to go more in depth about each option on each of the screens. One thing to know about LiveTime is everything works from left to right. So first we have our tracks, then we have our classes, then we have our events, then pilots and practice and schedule and racing. Everything starts from left to right. Like you can't create an event because you don't have a track yet. So we're going to start with tracks, and I'm going to show you step by step some of the more detailed options. So a track is kind of a carryover from the RC car world where you'd have like a hobby shop with a RC car track in the back, and that layout is not going to change very much. Whereas in drone racing, we have different fields that we have races in or events in, and we change tracks all the time, almost every time that we go out and fly. But one interesting thing that a lot of people don't realize is, let's say that you have a field with the qualifier track set up, and that's going to be set up for multiple events, multiple practice days, for example. You can create the field here, which our local field is a balloon field, and you can say FPV outdoor, and you can use this last layout change feature to basically do statistics on each of the events up until that date. So, for example, if I do multiple practice events or even multiple, real events for the balloon field for one track, I can go back and then run reports here on what were the fastest laps that everybody do, what were the top 3 consecutive that everybody did across multiple events. And so my friend Jim, he has a track in his backyard, and he would have people come maybe throughout the week for a couple weeks and put down times at different times. And we wanted to know, across all of those days, what were the fastest laps. And this is a feature that he found out about that he could run and be able to see what the different reports and statistics were for that. And that's something that I don't think a lot of people know is possible, that you can do with that. So just keep that in mind when creating your tracks. A lot of people just create one and then never think about it again. Um, Once we have that, though, we're going to go to classes, and I'm going to do a 5-inch open class, and we're going to select a category for quadcopter and open FPV and hit save. And so now we have our first class. Now, again, and it's something I'm guilty of as well, I just created one class called open and always ran that. But I would encourage you to think about other classes that you could run alongside your 5-inch event. So at the last event that I did, we did a 3-inch class as well as a 5-inch class. And what that does is it allows you to bring in more entry fees. I think we charged $10 for the 3-inch class and $20 for the 5-inch class. And so that's more money for your club, but also it gives people more opportunities to fly. And so maybe they don't have 5-inch quads yet, or whatever. They can still fly their 3-inch quad and not feel left out. And so that ended up being a very successful thing that I think we'll continue to do in the future. If you wanted to do like a tiny trainer spec class, you could do that as well. For the example today, I'm going to add this class, change the color, and have it here so I can kind of show you how to do that and how to make 2 different classes in one event work. The other cool thing you could do on the classes screen is set all the defaults for timing so that you don't have to keep doing it every time you create an event. I think a lot of people don't realize this either. That's helpful. One thing that I do need to get into really quick is the lap settings, and we have ignore invalid and breakout invalid. Now a lot of people just leave it on ignore invalid and they don't realize that that counts the whole shot. So sometimes people are okay with that when you're doing maybe laps in time and you want the time to start when the buzzer starts. But a lot of times, especially in the past year or two, when we started doing top 3 consecutive more, breakout invalid makes a lot more sense for that because you can do basically the clock resets whenever they cross the start line. And so breakout invalid is definitely an option to consider for formats when you're doing fastest lap or something like that, where you don't want to count the whole shot time in that first lap time. Down here, along with that, is you have heads up settings for the first lap. And so what this does is it changes this lap setting up here for only the first lap. So if you do no change, it's going to use this logic that you set here to calculate the first lap like all the other laps. If you set this to something else though, it's going to use this setting or this logic for the first lap and the first lap only. And then after that, it's going to go back to the regular lap settings logic to count, to figure out, if laps are counted or not. So what you can do is leave this as ignore invalid, but then come down here and do invalid breakout on the first lap. And if you hover over the question mark, it'll explain each of the options to you. But invalid breakout, as you see, is first crossing is marked as an invalid breakout lap. Clock resets for the next valid lap. And so that means on the very first lap, it's going to reset the clock whenever they hit the start line. And so that is a very important option to think about that a lot of people, I don't think, run, but it's very useful for formats like top three consecutive. You can also do alternate minimum lap time, which is a mouthful, but that basically means maybe your start blocks are a little bit further away on the course, and that first minimum lap time is actually going to take um, 10 seconds instead of 15 seconds, or some other scenario. You can basically then set this to be longer or shorter than your regular lap time settings would be. And let's see what the other options are. Invalid lap is similar to the ignore invalid. So if you're doing, breakout and then wanted to change it up for the first lap or whatever, it basically just adds more flexibility. But the only things that you'll really use are either no change, alternate minimum lap time, or invalid breakout. And I started doing the invalid breakout for most of the events that I do, and that basically gets rid of the whole shot, like I said, and that means as soon as they go through the start gate, that's when their lap time starts. Now, this doesn't actually mean that their clock starts at a different time. That's in a separate setting that we'll get into in a minute. This just talks about how their lap time is calculated. And it's important to know that difference between that and then the actual clock time. So this is just the logic for how lap times are calculated. Another really, really important thing that people miss a lot of times is the use heads up first lap. This is very, very important because if people only do 3 laps, if that's not checked, it won't actually count their 3 laps as a valid top 3 consecutive time. You have to have this checked in order for those 3 laps to be counted as that. And for example, if somebody does 5 laps and their last 2 laps are garbage, you don't have that checked, then it's going to use their second, third, and fourth lap instead of using their first lap if it was faster. So always make sure that this use heads up first lap is checked when doing pretty much everything. There's no reason that should be unchecked that I can think of. Caution laps is more for team racing. We don't really use that in regular FPV racing. Brake detection is basically just a helpful thing on the racing screen where if somebody does not cross the finish line for double their minimum lap or whatever you set here for their average lap, then it'll mark them as broken. And so it's helpful if you have a bunch of pilots and you're trying to see who's still in the air or not. You can see, oh, hey, that person hasn't crossed and they're probably crashed out. So we just leave that as default. For audio, this is pretty standard. I usually just leave this blank. Sometimes I do the countdown ticks. In order to do that, it is a little tricky. You do have to do, let's say you want like 3 tones and then the final tone. You would do 3 countdown ticks, 1 second delay in between them, otherwise it'll play them all at once. And then you can do a random start delay after that for the final tone. And so you can set this to 2 to 5 seconds. And so it'll go beep, 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 and then wait 2 to 5 seconds before it plays the final actual start tone. If you don't have the random selected, you can set just a standard delay. And usually I think that has to be 1 second. You have to play with it. I'll show you how to do that on the race screen later to test it out live. But once you get it figured out, you can input it here, and that way you don't have to set it each time you create a race with this class. And so very quickly, I'll go here, set the minimum lap time. 15 is usually a good number for that. I try to design courses that are around 20 seconds. Um, Sometimes we'll have, the really fast guys do 17 seconds, but 15 is usually a really good default. And so we'll leave that there, do invalid breakout, heads up first lap, and we're good to go. And that is all for the classes section.